Welcome back. Well, the government shutdown is entering day 27. The Senate will reconvene today after failing to pass a funding bill for the 12th time last week. Many federal workers are missing their first full paycheck. They did so this past Friday. And the air traffic control will miss their paycheck this Tuesday. Lawmakers also rejected Senator Ron Johnson's bill, which would have kept some of them paid. SNAP benefits are set to expire this coming Saturday. A lot happening. Joining me now is Nebraska Senator Deb Fischer, a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator, thanks very much for being here. Earlier, we had on Anna Paulina Luna, Florida Congresswoman, and she said that the talk on Capitol Hill right now is that you all are not getting back to work until Thanksgiving at least. What do you say?
Well, we are here in the Senate trying to work. You know, we're getting some confirmations done of the president's nominees. We passed the National Defense Authorization Act, but the Democrats are not moving when it comes to a government shutdown. And I think you bring up good points there, Maria. What we're looking at are people not getting paid, a SNAP program that is going to affect millions and millions of people because the Democrats will not vote to open up government. We'll have another vote on that this week. Hopefully they'll come to their senses and realize that we have to open government so then we can get to work on getting funding of government, but also making sure workers are getting paid. People who receive benefits are going to receive those as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very nice gesture, what we saw happen out of the Pentagon, the Department of War receiving a $130 million donation from billionaire businessman Timothy Mellon of the Mellon family. He wants to help pay America's troops during this shutdown. But come on, Senator, this is one paycheck. What's going to happen next paycheck? You can't find a billionaire to pay all these bills just to pick this up. So this is a nice gesture, but it doesn't necessarily end this thing. And we spoke with Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. I had him on the show yesterday, and he said now increasingly TSA agents are calling out sick. So isn't that the choke point for the economy? If we start seeing air traffic control shut down and TSA agents calling in sick, people starting to fly less, does that create what is a government shutdown to become an economic shutdown?
Exactly. You know, Maria, we shouldn't even be in a shutdown. The Democrats had the opportunity to vote on a clean CR that was sent to us by the House. There were no policy writers on it. There were no poison pills. They have voted on it before, I think like 13 times. But this time they decided no. No, they were not going to fund the military. No, they were not going to take care of our air traffic controllers. No, they were not going to be able to provide benefits to farmers, to people who are in needs getting their proper nutrition for themselves and their families. That was their decision. They need to stop it. They need to grow up, quit throwing a fit, open the government, and let's get to work.
Well, I mean, look, you make all great points, but the reality is that they're not they're not moving. And, you know, you, a key person on appropriations, know better than anyone the fact that your work is being stalled now. You were supposed to be working on all these appropriations bills so that you can get the work done and come up with a budget. You haven't done that, right? So where does that leave all these appropriations bills? And if you're going to be out close to Thanksgiving, then that November 21st deadline is null and void. What's the conversation in terms of a new CR? Are you going to take this into 26?
Boy, I hope not. I don't like CRs. They don't benefit anyone. A short-term one is fine, which is what we were looking at here to begin with, Maria. On Appropriations Committee in the Senate, we have passed out 8 bills. Leader Thune promised he'd put them on the floor. He has done that. We have passed 3. And hopefully we're going to do some more. What I was really frustrated at, what I was really angry at, to be honest with you, is that we passed out these appropriations bills in a bipartisan process with lots of support. So we put the defense appropriations on the floor. It didn't pass. We only had a couple Democrats join us on it. Why wouldn't they vote for it? That's a question that they need to be asked, because everybody's patting themselves on the back that in the Senate we passed the National Defense Authorization Act. We did that the week before. Oh, this is great. Look what we're giving our troops. Look what we're doing to defend this country. But when it came down to it, Republicans voted to fund all of those things, to fund paying our troops, to fund being able to provide them with the resources they need. And we only had a couple Democrats join us. I thank them for joining us, but we should have had everybody.
Well, of course, but I mean, who is going to blink first and who is going to be the adult in the room? You can't keep government closed for much longer, can you?
No, we can't. But there's no way that I personally can give in to these demands by the Democrats. Let's open government first. Then we'll talk about health care, this proposal that they came up with, that every Democrat voted for, to expire now, which were those COVID extensions. And yet they will not open government to even discuss that. They act like they have to have this vote before government's open. No, that is not going to happen. So they better realize that we're going to continue to offer bills like Ron Johnson's to pay our troops. We're going to offer bills to be able to pay our government workers. We're going to offer bills to pay the TSA. And the people of this country will see that they are not supportive of that at all. And I hope the people in this country, and especially in their states, call their offices, tell them to grow up, fund the government, and let's get going.
But now you've got to go back to the House to get the House voting on something. What would be the dates? What do you want to see? Do you want to see a CR funding the government until Christmas so that you're all standing there on December 24th, Christmas Eve, and you're unable to go home at the end of the year? Is that what's going to happen?
I hope not. You know, but if that's what it takes, we'll be here. I mean,
okay.
I'm here now. I'm here now and working. But
I see that, and that's great. This is fast becoming a major economic issue. I mean, I think we all need to admit that at this point. Markets may be rallying, and they're not focused on this, but that could change quickly. This is going to be an economic issue, especially if TSA agents are calling in sick. And it's also a national security issue. Senators, you're also looking at potential legislation on sweeping Russian sanctions. The president hit Russia's energy sector with penalties and sanctions last week, the two largest oil companies in the midst of Vladimir Putin's ongoing war with Ukraine. How does this impact all of that?
You know, this just shows, again, Russia is just after power. You know, I think it was a week ago they flew into the airspace of Lithuania. I support the president's sanctions. I support the bill by Senator Graham and Blumenthal. But there again, if we're able to get together and support sanctions on Russia to hold them accountable, to make it harder for them, why can't we get together and open up the government? It is very dangerous. You know, we hear the Democrats saying they don't want the president to have power. They don't want him, for example, making decisions about Venezuela. They don't want him to be able to unilaterally do whatever. That's what they're doing. They're giving the president more power because Congress is not functioning.
Right.
I really don't understand why they don't see that. In order for us to function as an equal branch of government, we need to be open. I don't get it. I seriously, I just don't get it.
Well, you make a good point. I mean, look, the reason that he has the power is because he's the president. Senator, elections have consequences. Good to see you. We'll be watching your work. Deb Fischer, thank you. In Washington this morning.
You.
We'll be right back.
Fox Business Alert, we've been telling you China has this massive edge on rare earth minerals and materials. As I reported at the top of the hour, controls nearly 90% of the world's processing and produces about 70% of global supply. The U.S., by contrast, handles around 12%. Beijing has shown it is more than willing to weaponize their dominance using export restrictions as a strategic trade lever against the West. Why does this matter? We don't just assume everybody knows what rare earth minerals are. Rare earth minerals are the building blocks of modern technology, essential for products ranging from high-performance drones to motors to robots, lasers, stealth aircraft, and submarines. Now, despite the name, rare earths are not exactly rare. There's 17 metals highlighted in red that are exceedingly difficult to extract and separate. That's what makes them rare. But one company, Eclaira Resources, is looking to help the West fight back against China's death grip. Friday, alongside the governor of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, the Rare Earths Refining Company announced that it is building the first heavy rare earth separation facility in the U.S. This is a $277 million project in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and it'll be part of its mine-to-magnet strategy, connecting Eclaira's iconic clay deposits in Brazil and Chile to this Louisiana plant. Eclaira CEO Ramon Barua Costa joins me now from Sao Paulo, Brazil, in a Fox Business exclusive. Welcome, Ramon. These plants and facilities take so much time to build. When will you break ground?
Hi, Liz. Thank you very much for inviting me to your show. It's a pleasure. Look, you're right. No, these plants take quite a bit to build, but most importantly, they take a little bit to ramp up because they require a very specific chemical equilibrium. So we have started already to build a pilot plant at Virginia Tech. We have partnered with one of the best engineering universities in the U.S. in order to accomplish this complicated feat. But in the case of Louisiana, we're going to be breaking ground in the second half of next year. We have taken advantage of a LED certified site in Louisiana. That means that the permits are mostly taken care of. Wow. They have been pre-approved already by the government, so it allows us to move very, very quickly.
The Louisiana state government has been very eager to get you here. And in fact, they provided about $46.5 million in tax incentives and grants. What about federal opportunities here? I'm very interested to know, are you talking to the U.S. government, to the Trump administration, which has shown extreme excitement and interest in even investing in some rare earth companies?
Absolutely, and we have already received a very significant interest from the Development Finance Corporation. It's a state-owned entity, and they have funded for Eclaira already $5 million to take us to feasibility. That feasibility is going to be published in the first quarter of next year, and it has been structured in such a way that it allows them for priority to invest further in equity in Eclaira going forward. So yes, the U.S. government is already, deploying capital in companies like ours.
So let's just explain, because we never sit there and think that every single person understands the value and the importance of rare earths. But I remember when we had the Rivian CEO, the EV company CEO here, and he was very concerned because the magnets that come from these rare earths have to go in every single motor. They go in batteries. They are crucial for this kind of production. And therefore, when I look at exactly what you might be able to do for us, the claim is that Eclaira could supply something like 75% of U.S. demand for the heavy rare earths. That would be dysprosium and terbium by 2028. I mean, can you confirm that?
Yes, that is completely correct. I think a big mistake, that many analysts in the market incur in is they talk about rare earths generally. And rare earths are 17 different elements, as you pointed out at the beginning, and each of them has their own business case. It has their own supply and demand. When we see, for example, the restrictions that the Chinese imposed very recently, they didn't talk about rare earths generically, but they were talking specifically about 7 rare earths, which happen to be heavy rare earths. They are much more scarce and difficult to obtain. And the Chinese obtain these critical elements from ionic clay deposits in the southern provinces of China. And exactly those same deposits appear in Chile and in Brazil. We're developing 2 of them, and they're going to be the feed that is going to come into Louisiana. Now, the production from these mines is going to be quite material. We expect to be able to supply 75% of the heavy rare earths that are going to be required by the EV industry, together, of course, with other applications like drones and wind turbines. But as we see the advent of robotics, robotics is going to change the game completely. Yes. The demand from that industry could be quite substantial.
Jensen Huang of NVIDIA told us, he said, robotics are definitely the next step when it comes to artificial intelligence and beyond that. Ramon, what I think is really critical here is that Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, basically said that if China is going to be an unreliable partner when it comes to exporting these rare earths, then basically the world will have to decouple from China. You are going to be key for that. Beijing is doing what maybe we might do if we had something that the rest of the world wanted. Does any of that keep you up at night?
Well, definitely, no, definitely. I think China is a formidable competitor, no, and we're going to try to compete with them. Mm-hmm. I think that the difference of our product is going to be the emphasis on sustainability, both from an environmental and social standpoint. We're going to have a product that probably is not necessarily going to compete in price with China, but you gave a very important word, no? What these industries require is reliability. I don't think that we're going to be, of course, able to replace China. On the contrary, we're going to be competing with them. We're going to be an alternative with them. And I see that the industry going forward is going to be looking for having at least more than one supplier, no? And we want to be that alternative.
Well, you're going to be spending a lot of time in Louisiana, so get ready to embrace jambalaya and gumbo, the big dishes there. Thank you very much, Ramon, and please come to visit us in New York. Or we'll come down there. I want to see this thing once you break ground.
You are invited. We have a pilot plant, as I mentioned, in Virginia Tech. Is going to be in operation at the end of the year, so happy to host you there.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Welcome back. Now this, oil and natural gas, arguably the U.S.'s most important natural resource. President Trump's second term putting even more focus on unleashing American energy and dominance. Last week, I got an exclusive tour of the Permian Basin in Midland, Texas, the largest, most secure oil-producing region in the world. I spoke with top leaders in the oil-producing sector and took a look at operations and what's next for this region. Watch. The pipes are churning and the sand and water are flowing once again. It's a new day for America's epicenter of oil and gas production. The Permian Basin, the largest secure supply of oil in the world, currently accounting for 40% of U.S. oil production, expected to go to 70%, and currently at 15% of U.S. natural gas production, expected to go much higher.
If you go back just 20 years ago, the U.S. was the third largest producer in the world. Saudi Arabia and Russia were larger. And at that time, if you combine Saudi Arabia's and Russia's oil and gas production, it was 3 times what the U.S. produced. Today, production in the U.S. of oil and gas is larger than Saudi Arabia and Russia combined.
That's why the Permian Basin is so amazing. It's been producing for over 100 years and, left for dead 2 or 3 times. And here we are now, producing over 6 million barrels a day, which on its own would be the 3rd largest oil-producing country in the world. And all of that's within essentially a 150-mile radius of where we are today.
New policies and executive orders from the Trump administration are enabling new business opportunities for America's oil producers, making America energy independent once again, amidst spiking new demand for natural gas to fire up AI data centers and oil to fuel a growing economy.
The first thing, we're going to get energy way down. Drill, baby, drill, all right?
Covering 86,000 miles and 52 counties across southeastern New Mexico and West Texas, the Permian Basin is made up of 3 subsidiary basins, the Delaware, the Midland, and Central Basins, with officials believing the U.S. has just scratched the surface of potential oil and gas here to be used at home and sold abroad. A major strategic asset for American energy and national security, while also a creator of new and high-paying jobs.
I'm second-generation driller. I grew up around it. I was good at math and science, but I picked it because it was a challenge. Back then, not many women in the industry. Seemed like a great thing to go into for that. This is my happy place, being out in the field. My husband's in the industry. My daughters are in the industry. I believe in what we do. This is a noble cause people need. We make people's lives better by what we do. So it's in my blood. There's nothing else I'd rather be doing.
Helping the U.S. insulate itself from competing oil-rich adversaries like Russia and Iran.
Whether you're talking gas in Europe or critical minerals with China, energy security and national security are linked. The U.S. is blessed with an abundance of natural resources, and we now have an administration that wants to see the energy industry invest in those resources to make sure that America's energy strength translates into economic strength and competitiveness, and importantly, security.
It's welcome news for an industry hampered by a climate ideology for 4 years prior, when the Biden administration tried to destroy oil production in favor of wind and solar renewables, which may or may not work depending on the weather.
The most important thing to tell people about the Permian Basin is that we've never endured a harder cycle than the last 4 years when we had a hostile administration, the Biden administration, that really wanted to kill this industry, that wanted to kill the crown jewel of energy production in the United States. And I took this personally as I represent the men and women that do this. I mean, they drained the SPR for political reasons. They taxed natural gas. They magically found a number of endangered species, animals that people have never heard of. They attempted to impose overbearing air quality regulations. They attempted to impose a fracking ban, and they actually banned the export of LNG to our allies and our partners around the world.
Big Oil's big break arrived about 15 years ago with the advent of hydraulic fracking and horizontal drilling. The process of sending drilling heads miles beneath the Earth's surface and then shifting horizontally to capture more while fracking the rock deep below, then sending water and sand at great velocity and compression into the rock to open up the fractures, enabled the oil and gas to escape. It's created rich extraction opportunities, going from 1 million barrels a day produced 10 years ago to 6 million barrels a day today.
We pump 40 or 45 barrels of water at high pressure because of all these red trucks over here, and 2,000 pounds of sand. So we have 1 ton of sand per foot. So if you just think about how the water comes in and cracks the rock, and the sand comes in and holds the rock open, it allows the oil to just seep through.
It can be anywhere from 4,500 PSI up to 9,000. So if you think about it, about 6,000 PSI can crush concrete. It's more than that we're pumping in these wells to crack that rock.
But as a new administration is opening new paths toward profit growth, market forces are colliding with policy as oil prices have gone down amidst President Trump's efforts to rein in inflation, pressuring oil profits and raising questions over whether oil and gas producers will put a pause on new investments next year because of falling prices and lower profits. Can you give us a sense of what you would expect for 2026?
Yeah, I think we see supply growing, particularly from the OPEC supplying countries, and demand growing steadily. But as this supply comes back, it's weighing on commodity markets, and so we're prepared for prices in 26 to be lower than they were in 25. As I said earlier, that's our business, but that's the current outlook. As we get on the other side of that and that supply's back in the market will come back into balance, and I think we'll see prices restored to a level a little bit higher. 26 may be a low point.
Economics drive capital allocation decisions. Today, oil's at $57 a barrel. I don't think we're necessarily high-fiving with that oil price, but again, we're going to find ways to reduce costs, cut our emissions, and make our break-evens lower to live to fight another day. We're kind of in the yellow light. We're not approaching a yellow light in a vehicle. We're not ready to hit the gas. We're not, hitting the brakes hard. And right now we're just kind of in that yellow light situation where there's not a price signal to allocate more capital to growth.
I'm coming to you from the deck of the Chevron oil drilling rig. Behind me is the pipe that is going down, penetrating the Earth's surface 2 miles beneath the Earth, and then it's going horizontally another 4 miles. This year, Chevron is celebrating 100 years at the Permian Basin, and it is producing 1 million barrels of oil every day right here. We've got a lot more coming up tomorrow on Mornings with Maria. Well, I was fascinated, Liz Peek and Ryan Payne. I was fascinated by the process of fracking and how oil is extracted from a rock. Here is the rock at the bottom of the sea level. This is basically what it is. And they frack it. They make fractures in the rock. and then they put at huge volume sand and water so that the fractures open up. The sand holds the fractures up, and then oil comes out, Liz. Amazing.
Yeah, it was a huge technological breakthrough several years ago, Maria. And if you remember, people had called for peak oil production in the United States. And indeed, oil production had been going down for many years before they discovered fracking and horizontal drilling. It was a huge revolution, and particularly for old fields like the Permian, which people basically thought were pretty much depleted. But you do bring up an economic sort of issue, which is at $60 oil, $50 oil, a lot of our future production is not economic. My guess is oil prices aren't going to stay that low for very long. The real future in our industry in this country is Alaska, and we need higher prices to promote that.
But you heard what Mike Wirth said just there, Ryan. He said he's expecting oil prices to be lower in 2026. If they're going to see lower prices, you've got to ask the question if, in fact, the CapEx stays flat for a year. Because they're not making, the band that oil companies want is 65 to 85.
That's right.
65 to 85 is sort of like the sweet spot, but we dropped below 60 last week.
And I think what you're going to see is, a lot of the wells will have to shut down, and it takes a long time for them to reboot. There's the old saying, lower prices solves lower prices. So I think at some point that is a problem. But in the meantime, I think this whole oil story has been huge because, oil's down like 16% this year. That's been extremely disinflationary. So when you think about Trump's economic policies, that's been a tremendous offset for any sort of tariff inflation we may have had. We really haven't had. And if you look at like the 10-year Treasury, it's almost under 4%. Like, think about mortgage rates. They're at 7% at the beginning of the year, at 6.3% now. That's extremely stimulative for the U.S. economy. It's been a real boon. So I think unleashing all this energy potential has been a huge offset for any inflationary pressure we may have seen this year. So that's been huge. We'll take a break.
But let's bring in Fox News contributor and former House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz and Fox and Friends Weekend co-host Charlie Hurt to discuss all this. All right, Charlie, let's do something that you don't hear a lot of on the campaign trail. Bring some facts in to the situation, particularly from Mamdani, who keeps talking about everything for free. He's going to spend money on this, spend money on that, and everything. One thing he can't spend money on is money to bring back the millions of taxpayers that already have left. Since 2012, we have lost 1.7 million taxpayers from New York, going to states like Texas, and they've taken billions, $500 billion of income with them to the various states that they've gone to. There's one simple reason why. I mean, it's not rocket science. We have a tax rate in New York City, combined city and state tax rate of 14.77%. Florida, 0. Texas, 0. You can't beat that. And he wants to raise taxes even more, the same taxes that led to almost 2 million people leaving. It's very simple, isn't it?
It should be, and I don't think a single one of those people who has fled New York over the taxes and over Democrat policies is sitting there hitting themselves in the head right now saying, oh, man, I should have stuck around for Mamdani's policies.
That's cruel. You're right.
And so kind of the problem here is that exodus of voters out of New York probably ends up actually helping him a little bit because all of the sane people have already begun leaving. The sad thing is that there are still some sane people left in New York, and he's probably going to drive the rest of them out with all of these policies. But the most important thing I think about all of this, and you touched on it right here, is that the rise of Mamdani in New York is not a rejection of sane Republican conservative policies. It's a rejection of decades of Democrat governance. They've tried this socialism light in New York City, and this is the result. And now they're just going to go full-blown communism.
I wonder, too, if there's kind of some similar trend going on in New Jersey right across the river right now, Jason, because, we see that the race there between Republican candidate Chitterelli and the Democrat candidate is getting very tight. And in recent days, we are seeing actually some Democrats throwing their support behind the Republican candidate. And one has to wonder if that has to do with taxes and the cost of living in New Jersey, which has just escalated tremendously in recent years. Energy prices are a major concern, and that's really an indictment on the Democrat Party, too. It seems like, Trump in the last election came within 6 points of winning New Jersey when he had lost in 2020 to Biden, 16 points. So he narrowed there, and he's also throwing his support behind Chitterelli. Jason, I'm curious about what your thoughts about how the landscape of the New Jersey race is looking.
Well, first of all, Jack Chitterelli is just an exceptional candidate. He really is a good candidate. And you're right, the energy issue in particular in New Jersey is a big, big issue. And so if you want fresh thoughts, you want fresh ideas, you want somebody who's not scandal-ridden like his opponent is, somebody who actually is competent and can do the job, then people are going to go for the Republican in this case, in Jack Chitterelli. And did Ro Khanna actually say that this election would demonstrate that Democrats could win in rural middle America states? I mean, that was almost laughable. And going back to New York, by the way, I totally concur with what Charlie said. But let's understand that New York City has a $117 billion budget, and Mamdani is already saying what we're going to do is raise taxes that much more because $117 billion just ain't enough.
Yeah, and I want to get to this as well, because after years of calling Trump's rigged election claims dangerous and a threat to democracy and all that, now House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, even before the election, is calling the GOP's redistricting push an effort to rig the 2026 midterms. Listen.
You said Democrats, there are no election deniers on our side of the aisle. You said that back in January. But recently, you've been using the term rigged elections in reference to the upcoming midterm.
No, I've been using that term in the context of Donald Trump's unprecedented effort to gerrymander congressional maps in a partisan fashion all across the country in order to rig the midterm elections.
You know, Democrats are also going through gerrymandering and redistricting.
Well, Democrats are going to push back aggressively to make sure that we have fair maps across the country, not partisan gerrymandering.
Now, first of all, Charlie, it was kind of interesting to see pushback from somebody who usually doesn't push back against Democrats and the newly reorganized CBS News team. So that's kind of interesting. But the BS that's been coming out on this whole redistricting, when in fact the Democrats have been doing it for decades, going back way back to dozens and dozens of years in California and elsewhere, it's just catching up with them. All the lies are catching up with them.
Yeah, the thing that I think really makes them mad is the fact that they have gotten caught with their hand in the cookie jar. As you point out, they have been the masters of gerrymandering across the country going back decades. And it's gotten so bad to the point where, and I love that the Voting Rights Act is now before the Supreme Court after many, many years of their abuse of that system in order to not provide fairness, but rather to just build Democrat districts. And I think what they're really mad about is that Republicans are finally kind of standing up saying, okay, actually, you know what, we're going to try to play this game too. And I would love to have normal districts all over the place and not have any of this nonsense going on. But if Democrats are going to do it and do it so skillfully as they have for so long, I don't think it's particularly unfair for Republicans to stand up and say, let's try to do this. And of course, what they're doing in Virginia is just absolutely shocking, especially when you listen to somebody like Hakeem Jeffries say, oh, it's so bad what Republicans are doing.
Absolutely.
So bad that what the Republicans are doing, Jason, that Gavin Newsom wants to do it even more over in California by pushing Proposition 60, putting that on the ballot, right?
Yeah, I mean, they had it the other way. Then they had to have an independent commission, like there's ever going to be an independent commission. Now they want to get rid of that because they want to go full throttle on it. So it just shows how principled they are. Look at the state of Utah. We have 4 Republican representatives. Well, Democrats have 14% voter registration in this state, and they tend to think, oh, well, hey, we got to gerrymander that because why don't the Democrats have a seat? Well, you have 14% of the population, so there's probably a reason why you don't have 25% of the actual vote that's coming out of Utah. But it's silly season. Hakeem Jeffries saying that Donald Trump's trying to rig it. He was trying to scare people going into the polls, coming this next Tuesday, and he got caught. And hats off to CBS for calling him out on it.
Yeah, well, it's again, the lies have become so obvious now that there's no way you can't bring them up when they try it again. Jason, Charlie, great to see you both. Thank you very much for being here.
Great to see you.
So, folks, can anyone ever trust or believe the Chinese CCP? This is part 2. There may be other parts coming. That's the subject of the riff. Right now, the vibes are good in Asia as President Trump's tour is yielding significant trade deals and national security relationships. Stock market loves it. As the Trump boom continues and markets are almost in melt-up mode, profits still the key to the market. But peaceful trade deals are helpful. And when the dust clears, it may be at the effective U.S. tariff rate, something around 15%, which is a pretty low number. And that will help profits. And there's no trade war retaliation, at least not in Asia. So here's a key point. Deals. Deals with Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Thailand, all of which include transshipment provisions. This is designed to stop China from routing their cheap exports through these countries in order to hide their unfair trading practices. Very important. In Japan, Mr. Trump seems to be getting along swimmingly with the new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, who has nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize. Japan's going to buy a lot of Ford 150 trucks. They're going to help the U.S. rare earths. And it also appears that the $550 billion Japanese investment in the U.S. will take place in some way, shape, or form over some period of time. And then there's China. So far, the Chinese story looks to be kind of a return to the future. By that, I mean Scott Bessent's so-called framework includes a suspension of China's rare earth moratorium, perhaps for a year, in which case President Trump presumably will suspend his 100% tariff surcharge. We don't know this for sure. That seems to be in the cards. China's going to resume buying soybeans, whose market price has suddenly jumped to $11 a bushel. Some kind of new deal on fentanyl is being reported. But let me pause here. Beijing was supposed to crack down on the export of various precursor chemicals that produce fentanyl 7 years ago. I was there at the G20 bilateral dinner in Buenos Aires, Argentina, when Mr. Trump raised the fentanyl issue with President Xi as the very first order of business that night. Xi's been saying yes to stopping fentanyl when in fact the reality is no, he never stops fentanyl. And we're going to believe him now? Xi thinks he has leverage with rare earths, but the U.S. has leverage with the largest economy in the world. The U.S. has more leverage because we just obliterated Iran and knocked China out of the Middle East game. The U.S. has even more leverage because the Chinese are being stopped in places like Venezuela and Argentina and perhaps elsewhere in South America. For some reason, Xi thinks Mr. Trump is going to renege on Taiwan independence. Don't bet on that one. But Mr. Trump expects China to stop buying Russian oil, which of course is financing the Ukraine war. And if they don't, then presumably secondary sanctions will take all of Chinese commerce out of the dollar system. I guess TikTok's going to be sold. Not my favorite sale. I just see it as one big Chinese spying algorithm, but that's me. And then finally, the U.S. is going to launch an investigation of the original U.S.-China Phase 1 deal. plenty to investigate there because basically it didn't work. China didn't abide by any of it. And that deal was signed almost 6 years ago. I was there for that one, too. Can anyone ever trust or believe the Chinese CCP? I'm just asking again. This part 2. There may be other parts coming, and that's my riff. All right.
President Trump emphasized that he'll have the final say on trade negotiations and all of this. Watch.
I don't want to tell you what the understanding is because what we understood yesterday or 2 days ago or even today is not going to be necessarily what it's going to be in 2 days. I mean, we're going to have a great talk. I have a lot of respect for President Xi. I like him a lot. He likes me a lot, I believe, and respects me, and I think he respects our country a lot. And we're going to have, I think we're going to have a successful transaction for both countries.
One quick one. Just, you said yesterday that you might invite China to Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
When would that be?
Well, sometime after. I'm going to go, or we pretty much agreed that I'll be going to China.
When is that?
In the earlier part of the year.
Okay.
And President Xi will be coming into maybe Washington or Palm Beach or someplace sometime after that.
The president also talked about the potential for an upcoming deal over TikTok.
Are you planning to sign the final deal on TikTok on Thursday when you meet with...
We might. That'll be one of the things we're discussing. Somebody reported it's been approved recently. I mean, we got an original approval from President Xi. I expect we'll have an approval, but I'd rather wait till a couple of days to let you know.
Joining me now to talk all about that is Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow Gordon Chang. Gordon, great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for being here. What is your assessment of what you're hearing here, that Scott Bessent is saying that they have a preliminary agreement going into this meeting on Thursday?
I'm very concerned, Maria, because we're giving the Chinese a concrete benefit, which is not imposing the 100% additional tariff for promises from China. Promises on rare earth, promises on soybean, promises on fentanyl. You know, we've done that so many times in the past for decades, and the Chinese do not comply with their agreements, but we comply with ours. So, you know, President Trump should remember that he already had a trade deal with China, the January 2020 Phase 1 trade pact, which China immediately and openly violated. So I'm very concerned that the Chinese are going to do this again, especially because Xi Jinping does not respect the United States, and he respects us even less than he did at the beginning of this decade.
So what is the president supposed to do at this point? I mean, look, they are threatening export controls on rare earth minerals, and it sounds like what Bessent said, that that's off the table for now. He suggested that they would look at it over the year, but for a year it would be off the table. Is that enough time? President Trump is walking this balance of pushing Beijing to do what he wants, but at the same time trying to bone up America to have the supply chains here so that we're not reliant on communist China.
Yes, President Trump is trying to buy time, and I can understand that. But to answer your question, what should we do? We should keep the 100% tariff and put that in place until the Chinese actually start sending rare earths to the United States. So I'd like to see them comply before we comply. Let's reverse this dynamic, because the dynamic that we have now, you know, that we just sort of accept their promises, it just has not worked. And it's not just in this decade, it's for decades preceding that. So let's do something different.
Well, it's a great point that you make, certainly. Look, the president is trying to gather allies all around him ahead of this meeting. He kicked off his 5-day tour of Asia with historic trade deals and peace agreements. This morning, the president greeting Japan's emperor in Tokyo ahead of his bilateral meeting with Japan's first female prime minister, Sanae Takaishi. The pair will talk trade and security later today. We will wait for that. And then in Malaysia on Sunday, the president was dancing alongside the prime minister with a warm and festive welcome on the tarmac there. He struck trade deals and mineral deals with Cambodia and Malaysia and secured framework trade deals with Thailand and Vietnam. The president, also overseeing a peace deal between Thailand and Cambodia, says he's open to meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un while in South Korea, Gordon. What are your thoughts there? And don't forget, he also did a big deal with Australia, which included space and AI agreement partnerships, submarine partnerships, defense pacts, back on track there. So he has gathered lots of allies going into this important meeting on Thursday. He's even talking about Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we'd never see Xi Jinping dance. So, we've got a great president there. Really does play to the crowd. Yesterday was a great day for the United States and for trade. And as you point out, we've got these arrangements and frameworks with Cambodia, with Thailand, with Malaysia. And what President Trump is doing is he's isolating the Chinese. And that's really, really important. We've got to build our friendships. We've got to build those partnerships. The one thing that wasn't terrific was that additional 10% tariff on Canada. Yes, we've got a lot of trade problems and disagreements with Canada, bigger than most Americans realize. But on the other hand, we need to secure that northern border before we go out and confront the Chinese. And on Kim Jong-un, that's a waste of time, in my view, because we should be working very closely with our partners in the region, because Kim has made it very clear that he's on board with China and Russia. And Kim is a major supporter of Russia's war effort in Ukraine. We're not going to talk Kim Jong-un out of this now until the United States looks dominant. And President Trump's got a lot of work to do because the Chinese don't respect us.
No, you're right. And we see that on screen every day. And based on their bad behavior on the global stage, what do you make of the president saying that he'd like to see Xi Jinping help him end the war on Ukraine? Would Xi Jinping even consider making a suggestion to Vladimir Putin?
The Chinese are all in support for Russia, and Russia wouldn't be fighting today were it not for China's support. And the thing that is important, what we heard from Matt Whitaker just a few moments ago on your show, is, look, the United States is going to impose costs on those countries that are supporting the Russian war effort. Well, we did that with India with the additional 25% tariff, but we haven't done it with China. And that's one of the reasons why China doesn't think very much of us, because they know that we will hit India, but we won't hit China. And this is going to sink the trade deal if we actually go forward and put those additional tariffs on China for buying Russian oil, because they're buying a lot of Russian oil.
Well, you would think that China was a little less tough, appearing to be tough, given the state of its economy. But the Chinese Communist Party has unveiled a new economic blueprint, they're calling it, to boost technology. The Wall Street Journal is writing that China gears up for more tech confrontation with the U.S. The Communist Party's new 5-year plan emphasizes self-sufficiency and advanced manufacturing as the rivalry with America looms large. Gordon, your reaction?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is what both China and the United States do in the year going forward while this truce is supposedly in effect. What China is doing is doubling down on a failed economic policy. Yes, they're doing great on manufacturing. They're doing great on exports, but they're building too many factories. And we see this from the price data from September and prior months. China is in a deep deflationary spiral. And what the Communist Party did at the fourth plenum is to endorse policies that are going to deepen that spiral downwards. They've got too many apartment buildings, too many high-speed rail lines, and they're going to have too many factories. So this is not good for China in the long run. Yes, they will steal a march on the first couple of years, but beyond that, they are in really deep trouble.
All good points. Gordon, great to see you. Thank you. First, there's this. The House Oversight Committee releasing its report on the investigation into former President Biden's use of the autopen and the alleged cover-up of his mental decline. The committee says executive actions signed via autopen should now be null and void, recommending the Justice Department look into whether Joe Biden himself even authorized them or knew about them. Biden's aides, Annie Tomasini, Anthony Bernal, and Karine Jean-Pierre, all facing scrutiny this morning for their part in the cover-up. The 91-page report includes more than a dozen transcribed interviews and numerous document requests. House Speaker Mike Johnson says the Biden White House's inner circle hid the signs of the former president's mental decline while he was in the Oval Office. Watch.
Every executive action signed by the autopen without written authorization from President Biden should be voided. This is an unprecedented situation in American politics and government. The actions of President Biden simply were not all his own actions, and there are major implications to that.
Attorney General Pam Bondi says her office is now reviewing all Biden pardons signed by the autopen. A Biden spokesperson is pushing back on all of it, telling Fox, quote, there was no conspiracy, there was no cover-up, and there was no wrongdoing. Joining me now is House Oversight Committee Chairman, Mr. James Comer. And, Mr. Chairman, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning, Maria.
You've called this one of the biggest political scandals in U.S. history. Tell us why.
Well, we found two things. First of all, there was a cover-up of Joe Biden's mental and cognitive decline. That in itself is a huge scandal. But secondly, we found that there was many instances of unauthorized use of the autopen. These were unnamed staffers that were acting as de facto president of the United States. We went through all the emails. We went through National Archives, any notes, anything. We could never find any instances where Joe Biden was actually in the room with the people who were making the decisions on use of the autopen to sign Joe Biden's signature on legal documents. We have emails from the Merrick Garland Department of Justice warning these Biden staffers of excessive use of the autopen for legal documents. We also have emails from Merrick Garland's Department of Justice questioning whether the president even knew that these pardons were being granted. And in review, in all the hours of depositions, in all of the emails and all of the documents that we reviewed, never was there evidence that Joe Biden was involved in the decision-making. And even more, we had evidence, Maria, that there was an obvious cover-up of his mental decline. Staffers admitted that they talked about giving Joe Biden a cognitive test, but ultimately declined to do that for whatever reason. So I think that now, with what we've gathered, this is the heavy lifting. We've now passed this along to Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice, and we fully expect those pardons to be declared null and void.
That is just unbelievable. I want to talk specifically about what's most important in terms of null and void, but on the cover-up, this is really extraordinary because it was all in plain sight for everyone to see. But God forbid you raised your hand and said, hey, I think our commander-in-chief is having a problem. You were slammed and attacked in social media. Of course, we called it out on this program many times back to 2018 and 2019. Watch this. We know that Biden is weak. We're not sure about his mental capacity. We know somebody else is running things, but the alternative is even worse. Kamala Harris. How is that presidential story going to look? One concern the Democrats have for Biden 2024 is his age and health. I mean, look, we all watch him. It doesn't bring anybody any joy to point out cognitive issues. No, it didn't bring us joy, but we pointed it out anyway. Congressman, I want to get your take on what was most important. He signed a lot of documents. He signed a lot of the autopen signed documents, the autopen signed pardons. And what do you believe is most important in terms of policy that Joe Biden's autopen signed off on?
Well, they signed all of the executive orders during the lame duck session. When the 3 months between November, when Donald Trump won the election, and January, when he actually took office, there was a lot of activity with that autopen. Ironically, 75% of the time, Maria, the autopen was used. Joe Biden was in the White House. I mean, they weren't even communicating with him. He was either unable to sign a document on his desk in the Oval Office, or they just weren't even paying attention. They had just brushed him aside and were acting as President of the United States. But you had many executive orders that were signed to Trump-proof this administration, to make it harder to eliminate the Department of Education, to make it harder to bring the federal employees who have been at home since COVID back to work. These were intentionally done by the unnamed bureaucrats that were authorizing the use of the autopen. Now, we also see the pardons that were signed. And look, right now, what Donald Trump's trying to do, what Pam Bondi and John Radcliffe and Kash Patel and all those guys have done, they've shined a light on the deep state abuses in the Department of Justice, in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the list goes on and on. A weaponized Department of Justice under Joe Biden and Merrick Garland. To hold these people accountable, it's been very difficult because many were granted pardons by the autopen on the last day of the Biden presidency with no record that Joe Biden played any role whatsoever in the authorization of those pardons. So I think all those pardons, from Dr. Fauci to the Biden family to Adam Schiff, the January 6th committee, the list goes on and on and on. I think every one of those pardons signed with the autopen with no evidence that Joe Biden was involved in the decision making, I think every one of those can be declared null and void by the Department of Justice, and I think our evidence in the investigation will make that decision hold up in court.
That is unbelievable. I mean, you're right. You had people like Liz Cheney and others in that January 6th committee reportedly destroying documents. We don't know what went on with the January 6th investigation. You're saying now that pardon is null and void, or should be null and void. You also had massive policies that affected the American people. All that spending, $7 trillion in spending, leading to 40-year high inflation, boys in girls' sports, a wide open border. Some of these things will be hard to undo because it's already documented that we've had 10 to 20 million people come in unvetted in this country, and they've committed serious crimes. But you're saying going forward, you will push for those documents and pardons to be null and void.
Absolutely, and the evidence that we've accumulated, and this is hours and hours and hours of deposition, hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents pertaining to emails and notes and things like that, I believe that's enough evidence to hold up in court. Whether it be the Supreme Court or any court in the land, the evidence is there that there was a cover-up and that there was unauthorized use of the autopen. That is a huge scandal. I would argue the biggest scandal in American history. And now the damage, some of the damage with respect to holding some of these people accountable. I mean, the president never even gave a statement or an interview as to why he pardoned the entire January 6th committee, or why he pardoned Dr. Fauci, or why he pardoned all of his siblings and their spouses. Of course, you and I know why he pardoned all those people. But if you're giving a pardon, two things you should be able to should be required to do, Maria. You should be required to sign it yourself, and secondly, stand in front of a TV camera and answer questions as to why you made that decision. Yeah. He has never made a public statement.
That's unbelievable.
About why he pardoned the overwhelming majority of those people, and he's never had to answer to a lot of those executive orders that were signed. Usually when a president signs an executive order, he does it in front of a TV camera. He answers questions just like we saw President Trump do. We've seen President Obama do it. The list goes on and on. At the very end of the administration, when that autopen was pretty much the President of the United States, there were no public statements from the President of the United States.
So obviously someone else was making these decisions and deciding who they wanted to pardon and who they wanted and what regulations they wanted to push forward. And in the middle of all of this, they were actually spying on Republicans. New documents revealed that more than 160 Republicans, including current Trump administration officials, may have been investigated by the FBI under Joe Biden's Operation Arctic Frost. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino, U.S. Pardon Attorney Ed Martin, and White House Trade Advisor Peter Navarro, all among the prominent GOP figures named in FBI files released by the House Judiciary Committee yesterday, Mr. Chairman. You had Chairman Jim Jordan saying he wants Special Counsel Jack Smith to sit for a formal deposition over this, Mr. Chairman. So what do you want to say about that? While somebody else was running things in the White House, pushing whatever policies they wanted, who knows if Joe Biden knew or not, using the autopen, another part of government was actually investigating their political opponents, the Republicans.
Yeah, this is what happens when you have a weak president. You have the deep state that takes control. The deep state are unnamed bureaucrats that are in positions of great power within various government agencies, and they have abused that power. They've weaponized their agencies against conservatives and certainly against Donald Trump. The pardons, which were signed, ironically, prevented any type of accountability if Donald Trump's new administration were able to shine a light on this, which they have. Now, once the pardons are eliminated, then we can start seeing accountability. And I think that's what most conservatives, most people that work hard and pay taxes every day, that are frustrated with the current state of the United States Congress, especially in the Senate with Chuck Schumer and the Democrats, and they're so frustrated that we're finding the truth about all of these abuses of power, but no one is held accountable. One reason they haven't been held accountable is because of the pardons, the evidence that Joe Biden was not involved in the pardon process, that the staff hid his cognitive decline and had instance after instance of unauthorized use of that autopen. That's enough evidence to get those pardons kicked out. And I hope that happens, and I hope we can finally see accountability.
Unbelievable. I got to tell you, Mr. Chairman, I mean, look, I knew they were abusing their power throughout, but even I am shocked because of the extent of this. Even I am shocked at the extent of the abuse that took place in the prior 4 years in Washington. Thank you very much for your work, Mr. Chairman, and we certainly will continue to spotlight it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
James Comer joining us. Stay with us. We'll be right back. But first, there's this. I am just back from 2 days in Texas Midland and the Permian Basin last week, the largest oil region in the country, arguably the world. I learned all about how one of America's most important strategic resources is extracted. I sat down with the CEO of Chevron, Mike Wirth, for this exclusive look.
Well, what's behind us is one of many rigs that are drilling here in the Permian Basin. Permian Basin, I think, is a great example of the ingenuity that our industry represents. We've been here for 100 years. Permian Basin is the part of the world that has delivered most of the oil production growth over the last decade to meet all the demand growth in the world. It's made the U.S. the #1 producer, and it's a massive area. It's the size of the UK and has rewritten the history books of oil and gas.
So the Permian Basin is that important. It's critical to economic security in America, and that means national security, doesn't it?
I think we've seen in many places in the world, especially recently, whether you're talking gas in Europe or critical minerals with China, energy security and national security are linked. The U.S. is blessed with an abundance of natural resources, and we now have an administration that wants to see the energy industry invest in those resources to make sure that America's energy strength translates into economic strength and competitiveness, and importantly, security.
You're not making what you were making a couple of years ago because oil is now below $60 a barrel. Is that going to cause you to pull back in any way in terms of CapEx spending?
Yeah, Maria, we've been very disciplined on our spending for many, many years. We take a long view on the supply, the demand, the price, and all the things that go into our investment program. And there's a lot of value for us in predictable execution of our plan, as opposed to moving activity up and moving activity down in response to short-term market dynamics. And so we know we're in a commodity business. We know prices will cycle down. We know they'll cycle back up. We tend not to respond to the price out the window. We tend to look down the road at what we see as a long-term view. The future is very hard to predict, and predicting oil prices, it's fraught. So I won't do that. But typically what happens when prices go down is, in aggregate, in our industry, activity tends to contract, which means that supply growth slows. And then as demand continues, you see the price signal incent more activity, and that means you need a higher price to bring that activity back up. And so after a period of low prices, we typically see a recovery. We'll see how long this current cycle is that we're in, but there will be a recovery on the other side of it. So there are really two technologies, big changes. Number one, we used to only drill a well vertically. We now can drill a well down 2 miles, and then horizontally, the well behind us is going to go almost 4 miles. And so it encounters through a relatively narrow band of rock that has the hydrocarbon molecules in it. We can run the well for 4 miles horizontally and get all that contact between the wellbore and the rock. So that's one, is steering the drill bit differently. And then number two, we use water and sand to break the rock up and create a pathway in this very, very hard shale for the hydrocarbon molecules to move to the wellbore. And so it's the combination of horizontal drilling and this high power fracturing of the rock which allows us to liberate those molecules to move and flow through the wellbore.
Well, that's pretty fascinating. So are you saying that where we're sitting right now, beneath us, there's oil and gas, and that hydraulic fracking operation is capturing it?
2 miles beneath where we're sitting, there's a large sheet that may only be 20 or 30 feet thick, but it extends hundreds of miles. And what we do is we go down into that sheet and we put a well bore right through that for several miles, and then we get the molecules to flow. we go over several hundred yards and we do it again, and then we go over several hundred yards and we do it again, and there these layers are stacked up with hard rock in between them, with many of those layers beneath us. And so think of a big layer cake, and what we're doing is we're going down into that and we're penetrating the layers that have the hydrocarbon. I'm old enough to remember the Arab oil embargo. I'm old enough to remember when the narrative was that the U.S. would forever be reducing its production and increasingly reliant on supplies from other parts of the world. There were wars that were fought where energy was part of the story of the wars. If you go back just 20 years ago, the U.S. was the third largest producer in the world. Saudi Arabia and Russia were larger. And at that time, if you combine Saudi Arabia's and Russia's oil and gas production, it was 3 times what the U.S. produced, and the U.S. was going down. Today, production in the U.S. of oil and gas is larger than Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. That completely changes the equation of energy diplomacy, of energy reliance. The U.S. is a net exporter of energy now, not a net importer. We can help our allies around the world. It changes our reliance on certain critical shipping lanes or less politically stable markets, and it gives us much more control over the destiny of our own economy.
But do you think falling oil prices are indicative of a weakening economy, of a weakening demand story?
No, I really don't. Demand for oil this year will be a record, the highest ever. Last year was a record. We expect 2026 to be higher still. The world's economy is growing and it's using more oil each and every year. The price situation we see now is much more a supply story. OPEC and the countries known as OPEC Plus over the last few years had restricted supply. And that has been reversed. And so they're now bringing some of their supply cuts back into the market. And so we're seeing supply grow at a rate faster than demand. That creates some downward pressure on prices, but it's really not indicative of weakening demand.
So what's the next growth story behind the U.S. right now?
Well, I think for our industry and certainly for our company, it's the AI story. You can't get away from it. And the limiting factor right now for AI expansion is data centers, and data centers are computer chips or GPUs and electricity. The U.S. has not really seen demand growth for electricity over the last 20 years. AI is driving a very sharp uptick in demand growth. The biggest opportunity is to recover more of the molecules that are in the ground. Right now, about 10% of what's in place comes through to the wellbore using the technologies we have today. We're investing in a whole range of technologies, some of which are moving out into field pilots to improve that. We're using AI and sensors, fiber optic sensors that we can put in the ground to change the parameters of a fracturing job as we're completing a well. We're looking at ways to modify the way that the fractures propagate through the rock.
So you literally believe that you've just scratched the surface?
100%.
My thanks to Mike Wirth, and that is the story of AI and energy right now, Lee. It's really fascinating to me, and this is one of the reasons that President Trump is trying to make the permitting process easier so that they can get the pipeline infrastructure in there and we're not wasting natural gas. We've got a whole abundance of natural gas that, unfortunately, oil companies are selling at a loss right now.
And I think we can't underscore how important it is to eliminate this red tape, and that we have this leadership, that this administration is the one in charge right now, because it is such a critical juncture for our country. When we're looking at the future of innovation, when we're looking at the world standing for our innovation and technology, it really hinges on our ability to supply energy. And I think it's really fascinating to look at how we're changing our view of what the energy industry was. The energy industry was seen as a demon, I think, for so long, and now we're seeing how essential it is to our future and to all of us, and we're looking for more innovation. We're looking to get all of this done, and I think that your reporting there really shows us just how important it is that we get this right.
Yeah, and this is the largest opportunity of secure oil and gas, arguably in the world. When you talk about where growth is, the growth could be in Alaska, but certainly they believe, the oil companies believe, there's 90% that they have not even gotten to yet in the Permian Basin, Greg.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we're just scratching the surface. You listen to going down 2 miles and then you can go horizontal 4 miles. I mean, technology is changing so quickly. I agree with Lee, too. I mean, we have the right administration in place, and the president has very good people around him to expedite this process right now.
And I think this economic story is different this time because of AI. AI is truly changing the way business and our lives operate. And so the demand is surging with regard to energy.
You know that President Xi of China is coming tomorrow here, and we're going to be, I hope, making a deal. I think we're going to have a deal. I think it'll be a good deal for both. And that's really a great result. You know, that's better than fighting and going through all sorts of problems and, you know, no reason for it. I think it's going to be a great deal for both, so I'll be meeting him tomorrow. A lot of people are interested.
That's President Trump in South Korea this morning on his upcoming meeting with Xi Jinping. The two leaders will meet tomorrow in Busan, South Korea, their first in-person meeting since 2019. The Wall Street Journal this morning is reporting that the two are expected to discuss lowering China tariffs in exchange for a fentanyl crackdown. It comes as the president signed peace deals and trade deals with the leaders of Cambodia, Thailand, and Malaysia, all in an effort to boost economic ties in exchange for lower tariffs. The president also announced a trade deal with South Korea this morning. Joining me now is Missouri Congressman Jason Smith. He is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Mr. Chairman, great to see you.
It's great to be with you, Maria.
Thank you so much for being here. And of course, you're in New York and not in Washington. I want to get to the government shutdown in a moment. But first, talk to us about what this means in Asia and all of these deals that the president is doing. What does that mean for your work on House Ways and Means?
So the president has now come to the agreement of over 10 different agreements throughout the world, whether it's the European Union, the United Kingdom, just in the last couple days, Malaysia and Cambodia, South Korea. It's major. If you just look at these countries completely eliminating their tariffs on U.S. agriculture products, but also U.S. manufactured goods, that helps put us on a level playing field of where we've been in years past. You look at the prior administrations, they've done nothing. In fact, the president in 9 months has done more than what the entire Biden administration did when it came to trade policy. And when you think about 96% of the world's consumers are outside the United States, it's important to deliver on these good trade agreements. I have met with more than 25 different world leaders just in the last couple months and trying to work with the administration to help open up more markets. More are coming.
Well, I mean, it's really incredible to me. It's Donald Trump's brilliance to go and align with all other friends in Asia ahead of his meeting with Xi Jinping. You know, doing a rare earth deal with Australia, coming up and cozying up to the Prime Minister of Japan, doing all those deals that you just mentioned, all in advance of this meeting with you know, Xi Jinping tomorrow, so that the U.S. is in its strongest point so far as he meets with China. What do you want to see out of a China deal?
Well, first off, the president's so strategic. We've not had a leader of the United States in a long time that's this strategic. Just the visual this morning of the dinner that he was having with the world leaders, the South Korean president, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore. And so that definitely helps lead the momentum of his meeting with the Chinese. I think it's super important that we get to an agreement. You look at what the president just initiated, a 301 investigation on China for not fulfilling the phase 1 trade agreement that he did in his first administration.
Right.
The Biden administration did zero to enforce that, but hopefully this will require enforcement. Think about just soybeans alone. The Chinese purchase somewhere between $12 to $15 billion worth of soybeans a year, except for this year. They have not purchased $1.
Wow.
And that has a huge impact on world markets, and they have done that to us.
Well, I mean, it leads me to the issue of all these supply chains in China. I mean, frankly, Congressman, I would like to know what Congress has been doing over the last 10 years about all these supply chains. I recognize your colleagues on the left have been government attacking President Trump. Russia, 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 making up this Russia collusion story from day one. They should have been focused on China, because now we're in a position where President Trump has to bully all these corporates to come and get their supply chains here and threaten tariffs because we have 90% of our prescription drugs made in China and India. That's wrong.
It is completely wrong, Maria. The truth of the matter is politicians has been out to lunch when it comes to looking at our supply chains.
That's ridiculous.
It is absolutely ridiculous. When it comes to food, when it comes to energy and pharmaceuticals, these are things that we should not be relying on countries that love to burn our flag. We need to be able to produce those products here in the United States, and whether it's rare earths or magnets, it's quite essential. We have to make sure that these industries thrive in the United States.
Well, also ridiculous is the fact that the government has been shut down for a month. We are stretching now into day 29. The Senate failed to approve a funding bill for the 13th time yesterday. As Vice President J.D. Vance tried to help, he says the administration has found a way to keep military members paid this week. Hey, do you know how we're paying the military?
You know, it looks like that the president's been able to shift some funds, but also some individuals have donated money to help pay the military. But this is absolutely unacceptable. This is the first time in the history of government that one party has shut down government by not voting for just a continuation of funding. What we are asking Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats to vote for is exactly what Chuck Schumer voted for in March of this year. And he voted for 13 times whenever Biden was in the White House. However, the one time when he has voted against a continuing resolution up until this point was during the last shutdown in the Trump presidency. It's not about delivering their priorities. You see them, which is really scary, agreeing that Americans are facing harm through this shutdown, but also you have the number 2 in the House, Catherine Clark, saying that this is leverage. So hurting families is leverage for their liberal approach, and that is to provide health care for illegals, to increase $1.5 trillion worth of spending. These are all things that they demanded.
Well, I mean, isn't this your job to keep the train on the tracks, you and your colleagues? So what are you going to do? Are you going to have to give in on these Obamacare subsidies to get this government open? Has there been conversation about you giving in on something?
Absolutely not. We need to negotiate after government is open, but open up government. That's essential. It is crazy that 60 votes in the United States Senate is what is preventing just a vote. We've not had, they've attempted 13 different votes in the United States Senate, but they've not had an actual vote on the funding mechanism because of the filibuster. I think that if this continues too long, that the Senate should have a real conversation about, in the time of a government shutdown, to look at making sure that you can pass a continuation of funding with just 51 votes.
So you want to go to that nuclear option then?
I don't consider that a nuclear option. I consider shutting down government for 29 days senseless as a nuclear option. They have showed that they are not cooperating or behaving appropriately, and it's hurting the American people. I'm saying, just in this example, in a government shutdown, a clean continuation of funding, that should continue, because then that would incentivize politicians to actually come together, to work together, and to fund government.
I think you might be right, Congressman, because you got to do something. Something's got to give here. And obviously, you had this clean continuing resolution that would have funded government until November 21st. That's obviously off the table. You're not going to do a continuing resolution for a couple of weeks. What are the plans? Do you want to do something, a CR, into the first quarter? I read that you wanted to do it past the midterm elections next year. I don't know if that would fly. But what's your thinking now in terms of the next CR approach?
Well, I'll say that the House appropriators did a good job. They passed every one of the 12 appropriation bills out of committee. We've passed about 70–80% of the appropriation bills off the House floor, which is a big step. We need to appropriate. I would hate to see a continuation of Biden's spending levels. That's not where we want to be. However, we need certainty. We do not need another government shutdown the month before the election. Let me tell you, if they're willing to shut it down now, next year, you betcha they're going to shut it down again. So we need to be mindful at whatever funding mechanism that we decide, whether it's a continuing resolution or whether it's appropriations bills, make it till December of next year.
December of 2026, after the midterm elections. You think that'll fly?
That is what I'm advocating for, and I think that creates stability and certainty for America.
Let me ask you this, because Sean Duffy was with me on Sunday, Transportation Secretary, and he told me air traffic control people are calling in sick, TSA agents are calling in sick. They do not want to work without a paycheck coming. I understand they are upset right now. I mean, isn't that a choke point, that this actually could be a government shutdown turning into an economic shutdown? When does this seriously hit the economy?
Maria, this is what the Democrats want. They don't want us in session, and they also want the economy to tank. Because guess what? With passing the big, beautiful bill in July, providing that tax certainty for businesses, they're investing. It's going gangbusters. If you just look at the GDP last quarter, it was over 4%. That's huge, which was projected to be at 1.8% prior to Trump being in office. They don't like what they're seeing when it comes to the economy, and it's unfortunate. They'll do whatever it takes. And apparently shutting down government and causing an economic downfall is apparently their approach.
So you're saying that half of the Congress, the Democrats, are hoping for an economic collapse?
Their actions show that they are wanting an economic collapse, because this government shutdown is senseless. There's no reason for it other than the fact that they are advocating for health care for illegals. They're advocating for increasing their temporary subsidies from COVID to insurance companies. That does not sound delivering for the American people.
Any chance you think this government opens next week when President Trump gets back?
I don't believe so. I don't see it.
Thanksgiving?
It better open way before then. I think what you're going to see November 1st, when those Senate staffers don't receive a paycheck, they might be putting some added pressure on their bosses over there to actually do their job.
All right. We will be watching all of this. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
We'll be watching your work. Congressman Jason Smith, stay with us. We'll be right back. It's Election Day in New York City now just under a week away. The race for the next mayor is getting tighter. Former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, has narrowed the gap between himself and frontrunner, the Democrat socialist Zohran Mamdani. Take a look at these new numbers. A new Suffolk University poll shows Mamdani is leading with 43%, and Andrew Cuomo is at 33.6%. Curtis Sliwa remains at 10.6%. Cuomo has narrowed that 10 points. It was 20 points away in the last Suffolk poll. Sliwa remains defiant on remaining in this race until next Tuesday, despite growing pressure to drop out so that Cuomo and Sliwa do not split the votes. Joining me now is the man himself, New York City now independent mayoral candidate, Andrew Cuomo, former governor of New York. Great to see you, Governor.
Good to be with you, Maria.
Thank you so much. Congratulations to you on narrowing this race. How are you going to close this gap?
Well, we have about another week left. The gap is closing on its own. What's happening, Maria, is the more they learn about Mamdani, the less support he has. What happened early on is, he was very good on social media and everything sounded fine. But now that when you actually look at what he was talking about, there's no there. Also, the Republican vote for Curtis Sliwa is dropping because people get that Sliwa is not a viable candidate. And really, if you vote for Curtis Sliwa, you're voting for Mamdani. And my agenda is much more attractive to the Republicans.
Well, you were feisty in that debate. Everybody said you won that last debate. How can you continue to point out some of these issues that you're talking about when referring to Mamdani and what he will do to New York?
Yeah, well, people get it. They now get the difference that I am the Democrat. He is a socialist. New York cannot survive as a socialist economy, right? He would chase corporations out of this city, out of this state. He would chase wealth out of this city and state. And that just doesn't work for anyone if you have declining revenue. He is against the NYPD. He's against public safety. And one of the key issues in this city is public safety. I want to add 5,000 police officers. He has phony solutions on how to make housing affordable. The only way to make housing affordable is build more housing. I was the former HUD secretary, as you know, and I have a whole plan to do that. So they understand that Mamdani doesn't have a plan, doesn't have any qualifications whatsoever for the job. It's really getting Republicans to understand what President Trump said, that Sliwa is not ready for prime time. He is not viable. Don't throw your vote away. It's between me and Mamdani.
And of course, we saw that from Eric Adams. I saw you at the Knicks game the other night with Eric Adams. He recently endorsed you. You picked up another major endorsement just yesterday from former New York Governor David Paterson. Here's what he said at your campaign event when you were in the Bronx. Watch this.
When we have so many issues before us, poor housing, crime, unemployment and underemployment, poor and inadequate health care facilities, and often a failed educational system, we need somebody who can come in and reorganize and give our children the education they deserve and put people in this city who can't afford it into decent and affordable housing. No one's going to get a free ride, no matter what some people are promising. But there is a great opportunity for this city if we elect this gentleman right now next Tuesday.
And your platform from day one has been ready on day one.
Ready on day one.
Yeah.
Qualifications matter, you know. Normally you go to hire someone, what's the first question you ask? What are your qualifications? What's your experience? Zoran has never had a real job. Let me just say that.
Yeah, you said that in the debate.
Yeah, and mayor of the city of New York is important. This is the anniversary of Hurricane Sandy. We were watching hurricane season, Hurricane Melissa. This was the anniversary of Hurricane Sandy in New York. You remember how devastating it was? 50 people lost their lives. You're mayor. You need to know how to deal with that. There is no on-the-job training. But again, Maria, it's going to come back to the Republicans. They're going to make the decision. And they have to understand that if you vote for Sliwa, you're voting for Mamdani, and New York cannot become a socialist city.
You know, I mean, some people make the point, well, how important really is the mayor when you consider what's going on in the governor's office? I mean, look, you're going to have to work with Kathy Hochul. As mayor, will you be able to cut taxes? Will you be able to make the kind of change that, for example, Curtis Sliwa has been promising?
Well, Curtis Sliwa can't make any change, right? That we know. So the rhetoric is nice, but there's no reality. The mayor of New York is a very powerful position. Yes, you need the governor. I know where you need the governor, and I know when you need the governor.
Right.
I was governor for 11 years. But the mayor in this situation, it's all about New York City. New York City is the engine for the state. The state doesn't work without New York City. And we have work to do in the city. We need 5,000 more police. We have to get taxes down, Maria, because people are leaving. We have to say to the business community, you're our friend, not our enemy. We want to work with you. How do we grow? And we have to have a competent government that builds housing quickly so the rents come down. Those things have to happen.
How are you going to get business people back to New York and, you know, residents who said, I'm done with this city because of crime, because of costs, and the rest? Are there incentive plans that you're working on to get those people to come back to New York?
Exactly. 2 points. First, we are working on incentive plans and tax incentive plans to get people to come back to New York. And here's my New York arrogance. They want to come back to New York. New York is a special place. Yes, people left during COVID, in the aftermath of COVID. Yes, quality of life dipped and people moved to other cities, other states. I believe they want to come home. This is their home. They want to be here. We just have to make it possible for them to come home. By cleaning up the place, tax incentives, they'll come back.
You said the last time we talked with you, when you came on my show a couple of weeks ago, you said, look, Maria, since the cashless bail situation, they changed it 4 times. And so it was a really important point, I think, that you made to speak to the viewers who are still on the fence. What do you want to say about that in terms of cashless bail that you may have directed initially? You said they changed it after you stepped down.
Yes, I passed the law 6 years ago. It has then been changed 4 times since then. So that law is gone, right? You change a law, you have a new law. The question is, the issue is not now the bail laws in New York. It is judges and prosecutors enforcing the law. Because what we also had at the same time was this mentality in New York City among the political elite: defund the police.
That's right.
Decriminalize everything. Nobody should go to jail for anything. That political movement did a lot of damage to New York, and that's the judges and the prosecutors. The law is the law. Enforce the law.
Andrew, how did we get here? Because I feel like that issue in and of itself has been a huge divider for Democrats. And so right now you've got moderate Democrats, I believe, like yourself, and you've got these other extremists who are trying to push Mamdani forward. He held a rally over the weekend at Forest Hill Stadium in Queens alongside Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So what do you want to say about the division within the Democrat Party right now? And many of our audience, I think, agrees with that, and they're moderate. You might lean to the right on some things, lean to the left on other things.
Yeah, Maria, look, the truth is there's a quiet civil war going on in the Democratic Party right now. You have an extreme left, radical left, Bernie Sanders, AOC. Mamdani is just the banner carrier for that movement, versus the mainstream moderate Democrats. They now call me moderate. They used to call me liberal. Now I'm a moderate because the whole party shifted. And that's what this election is about. It is that civil war. I believe that far left will destroy the Democratic Party. I believe it will destroy the Democratic Party nationwide if that far left becomes dominant. Mm-hmm. This is not a socialist country. They're not going to accept socialist policies. They're not anti-law and order. They're not anti-business, right? So that's why I think this election is so important. It's garnered so much attention. It's not just about mayor of New York. It's about the future of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it's a good point. Now, at that rally the other day, Mamdani knows you're coming for him. He had a lot to say about you. Watch this.
I stand before you tonight as the nominee of a Democratic Party reinvigorated in its pursuit of making government work for everyone, not just the wealthy and the well-connected. Andrew Cuomo and his corporate cronies did everything they could to make this campaign one of fear and one of smallness. Andrew Cuomo, Eric Adams, and Curtis Sliwa do not have an agenda for the future. We are going to freeze the rent for more than 2 million rent-stabilized tenants and use every resource at our disposal to build housing for everyone who needs it. We are going to eliminate the fare on every single bus line, and we are going to create universal childcare at no cost to parents.
He's going to freeze the rent. He's going to have free buses, free grocery stores. Who's paying for all of that?
Yeah. Well, this is why This is why his candidacy is collapsing. First of all, he can't do any of those things. He cannot freeze the rent. The mayor doesn't even control that. There's an independent board.
That's a good point.
It would be illegal for him to interfere with the independent board. Free buses. He doesn't control the buses. The state controls the buses. It is all made up. It's all made up. And he's an actor. He's a performer. He does it well. But it's all made up. And he goes back to, we would give this city over to the corporate elite, right? He's a socialist.
Yeah.
Against corporations, against job production. When we brought Amazon to New York, it was the socialists that killed the Amazon project. They are just anti-business, anti-growth, and the city doesn't live if it doesn't grow.
Yeah, it's a good point that you make. There's also some questions about how he's getting this support. And who's paying for the support? The New York Post today writes this: Zohran Mamdani faces criminal referrals from the DOJ over alleged illegal campaign donations from foreigners. So how did he become so popular in New York? I mean, you were the governor there. Obviously, you know all of this, what the governor is in charge of versus what the mayor is in charge of. But he was hit with 2 criminal referrals this week, filled by a campaign finance watchdog accusing him of accepting illegal contributions from foreign donors. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, I don't know anything beyond what I read, but it is clear. He came out of the pro-Gaza movement, right? The college protest movement. That's really who he is. He came out of the anti-Israel movement. At that rally you saw, he was with a fellow named Hassan Piker, who was the person who said America deserved 9/11. America deserved 9/11.
Unbelievable.
And he campaigns with him. I mean, he is, I think he's not only anti-New York, he's anti-American. How do you justify standing with a person who says we deserve 9/11? 3,000 people died, 150,000 suffering with 9/11 related illness. So he is totally out of sync with New Yorkers, and more New Yorkers are realizing that.
Well, this is very important because next year will be 25 years since 9/11, I believe. And if he's the mayor, how is he going to treat all of those people who are still in mourning from losing their lives? 3,000 people. I mean, all of the first responders that we lost on 9/11. I was there at the New York Stock Exchange. I guess I'm wondering if you're expecting New York to look more like London. You go to London right now, and it is largely Muslim. Women are completely covered up. I don't know if you expect, if Mamdani were to be in charge, him to change the look of New York as well.
Look, he is out of sync with how New Yorkers feel. You would never, you'd have to disassociate yourself immediately with anyone who said America deserved 9/11, right? It is so repulsive to all New Yorkers. I just think he doesn't get it. You know, he's dual citizenship. He was a citizen of Uganda. His parents own a mansion in Uganda. He spent a lot of time there. He just doesn't understand the New York culture, the New York values, what 9/11 meant, what entrepreneurial growth means, opportunity means, why people came here.
Yeah. And you said that the Democrat Party is going through this civil war right now. It's interesting to see the support that he has gotten from people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But let's put the socialism issue aside. I want to hear about your vision for New York. You were governor for 11 years. You know what is needed for the state or for the city. What is your vision? What is your platform? You said you're going to hire 5,000 new cops. What else?
Yeah. Right out of the box, 5,000 cops, 1,500 in the subways. You're going to have to raise the police salary to do that because we have the highest attrition rate from the police in history right now. They're all leaving. But safety first, let people know the subways are safe, the streets are safe. Second, we have to build affordable housing. We need 100,000 units the first year, because there is no supply. The reason rents are so high is we have a 1% vacancy rate. Now, we can do that. We can build housing, but you have to be organized. You have to be competent. You have to make the government work. I built a new LaGuardia Airport, Kennedy Airport, bridges, Second Avenue subway. So we know how to build, but you have to do it, and people have to see the construction quickly. Third, you have to say to the companies that are here, I will work with you on taxes and regulations. Stick with us. I want you to grow. I want to help you grow and start to reach out to businesses and people who left to bring them back. Those are the top 3 priorities.
Is there a message that you want to leave our viewers with right now as they consider going to the ballot box, early voting now, and when they get there next week on Election Day? Your message.
New York will be a socialist economy if Mamdani wins. The city will not survive that as we know it, and it will not recover for a long time. Republicans, there are 2 choices, me or Mamdani. Don't waste your vote. Vote for Curtis or vote for Mamdani. Get out and vote for me.
Andrew, great to have you this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll be watching Andrew Cuomo right here in New York. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Fortunately, Liz Peek is back with us again this morning. Why are Republicans not getting blamed for this shutdown?
Well, thankfully, they're not, because they're not responsible for the shutdown. I mean, even the government employees union, 800,000 strong, came out and said the Democrats should pass the continuing CR, the clean CR, which is exactly what the Republicans have put on the table 13 times now. It's been on the table for weeks, and the Democrats have shut it down, voted against it 13 times. I think voters are not so stupid that they understand that it is Democrats holding the country basically by the throat. And why? Because Schumer is scared of AOC. What a horrifying reality. That's where we are. If he caves, look at his fundraising in the last quarter. He raised a total of $133,000. What did AOC raise? $4.5 million, Stuart. Ouch. This game is over for Senator Schumer, and he knows it.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's true.
We're in agreement.
Yeah. I mean, but really, what an angry little man. You're totally right.
Okay.
Not much for him.
Okay. On the same vein,
yeah.
You say that the left's embrace of Mandami could doom Democrats nationwide. So my question is the other side of the coin. Why are no senior Democrats calling out Mandami if he can do so much damage to him?
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, again, we know that the energy is on the left. The energy and the money, as I've just pointed out, is on the left, the far left. But really, guess what? This is not going to win the White House. That's really the point. Only a quarter of the country, literally 25%, identify themselves as liberal or very liberal. The entire rest of the country, there's some undecided, but let's call it 2/3, call themselves moderates or conservatives. Conservatives are way bigger. So they really think that backing a Democrat socialist is going to play well for them in the midterms or nationally? Trying to win the White House back? No, it's not. I mean, I really find it extraordinary, first of all, that Democrats put all their eggs in one basket by having their senior leadership exclusively New York. What were they thinking? Right. Yep. And both those people are, in fact, vulnerable, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, to the far left in New York. But how does that play in the rest of the country? All the seats that are up for grabs, undecided, almost all of them are in Iowa or Pennsylvania, places where, guess what? They're not so extraordinarily excited about socialism, which is what is on parade here in New York City right now.
Hochul is vulnerable. Governor
oh, no. Oh, she is totally, she's toast as far as I'm concerned. Here's why. So she endorsed Mamdani, very foolishly not extracting a promise to be endorsed in return by Mamdani when she comes up for re-election next year for the governor. She's already being primaried by her lieutenant governor, Antonio Delgado, who's to the left. Who do you think is more likely to get Mamdani's endorsement? It's not going to be Kathy Hochul.
You know, Liz, I really do hope that I never, ever cross you.
I hope so, too. That would be so sad, honestly.
The president says he'll press Xi on soybean purchases, fentanyl, and NVIDIA chip exports, Beijing's curbs on rare earths, and Trump's massive tariff hikes on China will also be on the table. So, EJ, you're watching what's going on in Asia. We've been debating fiercely on this show how much it matters. But take us into the U.S. economy for a second, okay? We get big numbers in these deals, whether it's South Korea, I think it's $350 billion. Japan is like $490 billion. Investment coming in. Now, those are pledges. I don't think they've happened yet. But you've also got an economy where clearly the job picture is sluggish right now. Mm-hmm. How much do these deals make a near-term difference for getting that job market picked up, kind of in line with the GDP projections we're seeing?
Sure. Well, so, Brian, this is the big advantage to investment, right? You get both a short-term boost, but you also get the long-term boost. What's the short-term? Well, if your investment is going to be for things like Toyota building a factory here, what does that do? It means you immediately get some construction jobs. After that factory's up and running, now you have the manufacturing jobs to run it. And then all of the different ways in which the supply chain is affected. So you get jobs in not just making cars, but now making steel, making electronics, rubber, glass, you name it. Right? So there's kind of a, I don't want to say a trickle down, but maybe a spillover. There are all these related industries that are going to be benefited as well. So again, that's the beauty of investment. consumer spending is great because we need to consume today, but investment in a lot of ways is better because, again, you get the boost to the economy today, and then it continues for quarters and years to come.
I mean, I agree with the logic there, Jackie. For me, the issue is like timelines. So how soon does this happen? How fast do these investments break ground? How quickly do you get the hiring? And look, let's just make it a little bit political. You've got midterm elections in 2026, okay? So do these things happen fast enough for people to walk into 2026 and say, I feel good about my job prospects. I feel like this economy's humming and it's working for Main Street, you know, not just Wall Street investors.
Some yes, some no. It won't be fully fleshed out by then. But I do think enough people see what the president has done with the big, beautiful bill, tax incentives, not just for individuals, but also small businesses. The extension of the 2017 tax cuts were very, very important for small business in this country, and also for corporations to be able to reinvest and do more, creating the situation where we'll have growth. I just want to pivot to China for 1 second.
Yep.
Because I think there's a huge piece of this that we sort of set up from the top, that the fentanyl piece, which is really where a lot of the grievances, I would say, started with China to begin with. The president, remember, had instituted a separate fentanyl tariff on Chinese goods just to punish them for that. So people are starting to do the math here and say, if President Xi comes to the table and he's willing to do more on that front, he could negotiate himself down from a 20% tariff to, say, a 10% tariff, which would then average out and bring down all of his overall tariffs. So I think he's going to start there because that's low-hanging, easier fruit for him. And that's one of the things that the president really wants to make grounds on, headway on. The other thing is the rare earth aspect of it, where if he can negotiate Trump some time, whether it's a year or 2 years, he's already working on his diversification plan. And I think the United States will be in good shape not to rely on China in that way. So I think that's sort of a point where they lose, unless they want to bang down the hammer and be really difficult and cut us off tomorrow, which I would cut off their nose in spite of their face. I don't think that would be really smart. But these are some of the aspects of this particular negotiation and the art of the Trump deal that I find fascinating. I can't wait to see this play out.
I can't either. Lydia, let me throw one at you and see if you'll bite on this.
Okay.
TikTok will be on the table. Some people say having TikTok on the table gives America something that we maybe shouldn't really want in the first place, and it's going to give Xi a little bit of leverage to get something he wants.
Yeah.
Do you like that TikTok's going to be part of the conversation, or do you wish we had just let it die on the vine?
I think the reality is that it's there. It doesn't matter. It's not going to go anywhere. And I think for so many Americans, it's part of their social media diet that they want back. And in fact, I want to be a part of the conversation on TikTok, but I'm waiting for that clarity about exactly how it's owned, how it's operated, how is that data being managed. And those are some of the details that we're still waiting to learn. I want to echo and underscore exactly what Jackie said about the fentanyl deal. I think that is so, maybe one of the most impactful probably portions of this deal, that it has impacted way too many Americans. Fentanyl pouring over our borders and recognizing where the origin of that problem is. The way in which President Trump has gone about imposing the fentanyl tariffs, we know is subject of ongoing litigation. The Supreme Court is going to be hearing oral arguments about that next week. But I would say any conversation about fentanyl that would stop the flow of those drugs into this country, people will look at that and say, who cares? If he got it done and maybe he did it in a way that Congress doesn't like or that litigants don't like, it doesn't matter. I think that is such a big deal and would be a victory for him. We can look back at China, in 2020, there was a deal. Larry Kudlow was a part of negotiating it, and has reminded us so wisely many times that they just didn't play by the rules, even when they agreed to it then. That always reminds me to keep expectations low when it comes to China.
Right.
But I was encouraged today to read a headline from Reuters that said China just bought some soybean cargoes from the U.S. for the first time this year.
A little good faith going into the negotiation,
I'm
maybe?
just saying that's exactly the way I read it. I think they're trying to play nice ahead of the actual sit down.
Okay, so Brianna, let me ask you then, because I've been very persuaded by Larry that these guys make deals all the time that they don't keep. And I think fentanyl could be in that category. Soybeans have been in that category. Rare earths, they flip-flopped. So what should Americans expect out of this? What should our standard be for a win? Knowing that when you negotiate with China, what they say historically has not been what you've gotten.
Yeah, and I think for TikTok, for that aspect, I don't necessarily think we should be excited either way, because I don't think China necessarily wants to give what the United States wants. To the fentanyl point, to snowball on this, I think the average American knows that any win on fentanyl is something tangible that the average American who's not engaged in politics or business can understand as a win for President Trump versus tariffs. It's not really digestible at the kitchen table. Talking about fentanyl at the kitchen table, President Trump stopping that flow is something that's good. And to the rare earths minerals, we were just talking about this last segment. Look, President Trump struck somewhat of a deal with Malaysia, but it's still unclear because Malaysia is now saying, well, we're not actually going to, get rid of our ban on rare earth minerals. They've also been working with China over the past few weeks. So I think President Trump going over there and trying to hammer out details with China for rare earths might send a signal to Malaysia and other countries that we're trying to diversify with that it is an open market. You should be involved with the United States, and don't cozy up to Beijing because they might stab you in the back the way they've essentially done to the United States and other countries.
EJ, I've read Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and what he's been saying lately, and he's made some curious comments, interesting comments around what China's done on rare earths has been kind of a China versus the world thing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And my view has been, and this may be too strong, but my view has been, I think ultimately with China as a communist country, decoupling in key areas at least is the only realistic alternative to what we've got going right now. From an economic standpoint, is that suicide for us, or is that actually where we should be going?
Well, it's one thing if you could flip a switch and instantly do it today. Right? Then you might bring up that discussion of economic suicide. But I don't think that's what anybody's talking about, because it wouldn't just be suicide for us. It's suicide for China, too, right? They are, as bringing up the Treasury Secretary, as he has pointed out many times, they are the most lopsided economy in the world today. They are so overly dependent on their export market that if you do shut that off, I mean, it's game over for them. Xi has enough problems as it is with things like youth unemployment and prices right now. There's no way he can make the situation for himself even worse, I think, and still hold on to power.
How big are his problems? We've heard people say they're huge. How big are they? How do you know, even with an economy that never tells you the truth on their economic statistics?
Great question. So one of the things that we have to do, for example, to figure out how much are they actually exporting, because you can't trust their numbers, you have to try to go around to the rest of the world and figure out what percentage of their imports are from China and add all of that up and do all the exchange rates and everything else, and then try to figure out, okay, how close is China's published figure to reality? It's a lot of work. It's difficult to do. But sure enough, you can see that, as you said, they're not publishing real numbers. They haven't for years.
But what we're finding in doing that work is suggesting their economy is in very, very rough shape right now. Xi does not have leverage when it comes to strength of his economy.
Sure, and they are pouring in both fiscal and monetary stimulus, right? As much as they can right now to try to keep that thing going.
One area where the U.S. and China are in fierce competition is EVs, Jackie, Tesla. What's going on?
Preparing to name a new CEO if shareholders do reject Elon Musk's proposed $1 trillion pay package and he resigns. So Tesla's chair says that Musk's successor would likely be someone from within the company. The vote is scheduled for next Thursday. I can just say this. This would not be a situation where, for example, Steve Jobs dies and Tim Cook takes over. Obviously, you have no option. Investors and Wall Street will not like Elon Musk's resignation of this company, especially since he really doesn't have to. And pay packages, listen, if he's worth it, he's worth it. The shareholders can decide.
Can I betray, Lydia? I saw you take a real deep breath when I read that little point about Elon Musk. Is that irrecoverable for Tesla if he's gone?
I was just thinking, what would Tesla be without Elon Musk? I mean, Tesla is Elon is Tesla. I just can't imagine that shareholders would actually go for that and what that would mean for the company.
I think Elon's got a lot of leverage in this little negotiation going on.
Right now, let's turn to this exclusive. Joining me right now from South Korea is the Treasury Secretary of this great nation, Scott Bessent. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Maria, good evening from South Korea.
Congratulations to you and your team on what we're hearing out of the China deal. Can you walk us through the most important elements of this agreement that President Trump said was very friendly between the United States and China?
Well, Maria, all the congratulations should go to President Trump. He has a fine relationship with President Xi. The mood in the room was one of great respect, but also between two men who knew each other quite well and knew what they were getting into. I think what was very helpful for today's meeting was my counterpart, the Vice Premier, Hu Feng, and I had 2 days of very tough and fulsome negotiations in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, earlier in the week. So President Xi walked in the room and said, I think we can agree on the consensus reached in Malaysia. And so the two leaders were able to discuss more bigger picture ideas during the conversation, including what the remainder of President Trump's term would look like, because I think the Chinese realize that with President Trump in office, it is an opportunity to reset the relationship in terms of mutual respect. President Trump is commanding respect around the world like no other leader.
Yeah, for sure. And we saw that throughout all of his meetings. Now, Secretary, many people were worried about the flow of rare earth minerals. And I know that you addressed this with your counterpart first, and then the president took it on with Xi Jinping. Is this a pause for a year? What is the story in terms of the flow of rare earth minerals?
Yes, so on October 8th, the Chinese surprised the world and announced that a few weeks, a month out, they were going to put export controls on products with even 0.01% of rare earth minerals produced or manufactured in China. They were going to put export controls on those. It was China versus the world, and we were able to negotiate a one-year pause on that in return for some things that the Chinese wanted. President Trump was also able to negotiate with President Xi an agreement to start working on ending this terrible fentanyl crisis that is affecting the U.S. And what is China's part in that? The precursor chemicals for fentanyl are shipped from China to Canada to Mexico. They make their way into the U.S. and are killing hundreds of thousands of our citizens and ruining families and lives, for decades to come. So President Trump very wisely in the spring had put a 20% fentanyl tariff on China. We agreed to cut that in half, and in return, they're going to give us substantial cooperation in return for reducing the precursor flow into North America. We're going to have working groups that over the coming weeks will set very objective measures on whether that's successful or not.
So this pause for a year would be until next October. Secretary, what are you going to do in terms of verifying that? And it really did surprise the world when they put those export controls in place. Do you believe that, in fact, you will be able to get that refined magnets flowing for this year? And is that enough time for the U.S. to become independent in terms of the need for those rare earth magnets? I know that the president was very smart in terms of doing lots of deals with Asian partners, even before sitting down with Xi Jinping, and among those was a deal with Australia for rare earth as well.
Right. So, Maria, let's work backwards there. The president has been laser focused since the day he came in office in terms of rare earths. He issued an executive order right out of the blocks. He recognized that this is a strategic vulnerability for the U.S. The Chinese control about 70% of the mining, but more importantly, they control about 90% of the processing and refining. So since January, President Trump, this administration have been working to stand up facilities where we can refine and process rare earths. I think it is something that we inherited. This was a mess that's 20 years in the making, And President Trump is determined to solve this because we have to take control of our supply chains. And we're going to be taking control of our supply chains in rare earths, in semiconductors, in medicines, in steel, in shipbuilding. Part of the America First agenda that President Trump is pushing is for us to be able to control our own destiny and not have any choke points in our supply chains like he inherited.
This is very important, Secretary. Really, congratulations on that. In response, is the U.S. suspending that new rule that was put in place that would have expanded the entity list? Export restrictions to any entity that is at least 50% owned by one or more entities on the list for 1 year?
Yes, we are going to be suspending that for a year in return for the suspension on the rare earth licensing regime. And Maria, what's important to note here, that it was China versus the world. China threatened to put this licensing regime on the entire world, and President Trump, as the leader of the free world, negotiated this deal for everyone, because what's important for people to understand is that the Western supply chains, along with the democracies in Asia, India, Japan, Korea, where I'm standing now, the supply chains are very integrated. So it wouldn't have done any good just to suspend the licenses or the licensing regime for the U.S. It has to be for the whole world. The whole world is united here, and we're all moving forward together. And it was President Trump's leadership that's done this.
Well, it's very interesting to see what was most important to China and what we're giving them in response. And obviously that entity list export restriction was quite important to them. What about suspending the measures from the Section 301 investigation, Secretary, which, of course, initially targeted China's maritime, logistics and shipbuilding industries for 1 year? Is that also on the table?
That was also suspended, Maria. In the meantime, just the threat of that 301 since the summer, I believe that the Chinese shipbuilders have seen substantial diminutions or decreases in their order books. So that's going to be suspended for a year. And what's important, President Trump agreed last night with the president of Korea on a historic deal that is going to bring shipbuilding back to the U.S. And the Koreans are great shipbuilders. The Japanese are great shipbuilders. So we are going to integrate our shipbuilding with our Western allies. And Maria, this is what leadership looks like. When the U.S. leads, the world follows. And President Trump has been doing that. I've been fortunate enough that over the past 9 months, I've seen President Trump in action. I saw him at the G7 in Canada with the Europeans. I saw him at the United Nations, where he gathered, I would guess, 85% of the Muslim-speaking world in a room that set the stage for the deal in Gaza. And then 2 days ago at the ASEAN conference, we had the leaders in Asia. And it is the respect for President Trump in all three of these groups that is allowing U.S. leadership to reassert itself. And this is what is going to matter for the U.S. economy, the American people, and the free world. We're all moving forward together with his leadership.
Yes, I noted that many times in the last few days, Secretary, because even before getting to China, the president did that deal with Australia, then before he got to Asia, rather, did the deal with Australia, and then once in Asia, did deals with Cambodia and Thailand and of course, Japan. The meeting with the new Japanese prime minister seemed very warm. I want to get your take on that, because there was some reports, even though there's this iconic photo of them walking down the steps and having a very warm conversation, but there were reports that she pushed back on the president's request for Japan to stop buying oil from Russia. What can you tell us about that, sir?
So a couple of things, Maria. Again, President Trump came into Asia, into China's backyard, and the Asian countries want to do deals with the U.S. They want to bring their manufacturing to the U.S. They want to trade with the U.S. We've made the U.S. the best venue for manufacturing. The president's bringing back precision manufacturing. And in terms of the relationship between President Trump and the new Japanese Prime Minister, I think it's going to be a fantastic relationship. As you know, he had a very close relationship with Prime Minister Abe, who was tragically assassinated. The new Prime Minister is a protege of Prime Minister Abe. I think they had great personal chemistry, but also I think that they are fully aligned in terms of the in terms of the Japanese buying Russian oil. They buy, I think, a substantial amount of LNG, about 10% of their needs from Russia. And I believe over time they will be weaning off of that, and they will be part of a very large pipeline project that the U.S. is constructing in Alaska. The Koreans may be part of it. And President Xi unilaterally in the meeting today brought up that the Chinese might like to be part of it. So it's energy dominance like we haven't seen before in the U.S. The past 4 years under the Biden administration, they sought to suppress one of the U.S.'s great assets. So not only does it create jobs, it creates strategic safety, and it allows us to exercise one of our great advantages globally, which is supplying energy to the world and taking that away from the Russians.
This is huge news, certainly, and obviously quite important to America, as is the issue around TikTok. Was that part of any agreement, sir? Will China resolve any issues related to TikTok operating in the United States?
Maria, in Kuala Lumpur, we finalized the TikTok agreement in terms of getting Chinese approval, and I would expect that that would go forward in the coming weeks and months, and we'll finally see a resolution to that.
The U.S. and Japan signed a new agreement on nuclear power as well as rare earth. Secretary, the President and the Prime Minister, Takaishi, called it the start of a new golden age in relations. What can you tell us about President Trump's plans on the nuclear energy part of this?
Maria, President Trump is bringing back nuclear power like we've never seen before. It's clean, it's reliable. The U.S. has an advantage. And again, for years, for some unknown reason, nuclear power was not used in the U.S., and we're bringing it back as fast as we can. One of the things that we discovered when we got in was the permitting problem and the need for reform in terms of getting the plants off the ground. So President Trump has worked with EPA Commissioner Lee Zeldin, who's doing a fantastic job. He's given him the mandate to move as quickly as possible and in terms of permitting. And you know, these things are going to go from what could be dozens of years to a few months or even a few weeks. So it's all hands on deck for nuclear power. The Chinese are building nuclear plants. They're starting them up every month, and we are behind. But under President Trump's leadership, we're going to catch up.
Secretary, when are you expecting a signed contract or a signed agreement from the dealings in China?
Maria, we finished it. The Kuala Lumpur agreement was finished in the middle of the night last night, so I expect that we will exchange signatures possibly as soon as next week. And Maria, one of the big parts of this agreement, and I'm going to break the news here on your story, is the massive amount of agriculture purchases that the Chinese are going to be doing in this agreement. So the Chinese have agreed to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans during this season, right now, between now and the should be January. And then for the next 3 years, they're going to be buying a minimum a minimum of 25 million metric tons per annum for the next 3 years. What I would expect is, as President Trump did in 2020, after President Xi had agreed to the Phase 1 deal, he called him regularly and got him to buy more, and that number went up much higher. The other thing to realize is, in addition to the 12 this year, the 25 per year, 25 million tons per year for the next 3 years, we've also signed trade deals with countries in Southeast Asia, the rest of the world, to buy our soybeans to the tune of another 19 million metric tons. So, our great soybean farmers, who the Chinese used as political pawns, that's off the table, and they should prosper in the years to come. They backed President Trump, and they knew that he had their back, and this deal is the culmination of that, and it sets in motion great purchase agreements for the next 3.5 years.
That is incredible. Congratulations on all of this. Obviously, your efforts and the president's efforts to go all the way to Asia to have these one-on-one meetings is yielding great results. And the president has been talking about $17 trillion in new investment into America on his watch. That was before we heard what South Korea is doing in terms of investing $350 billion in the U.S. In exchange for lower tariffs there, and Seoul getting the green light to build a nuclear-powered submarine at the Philadelphia shipyards. I mean, it's close to $1 trillion deal that you're talking about coming from South Korea alone. But, Mr. Secretary, you are now going to head back to Washington, and you will arrive to a whole different story and a whole different reaction from your colleagues in Washington as the government shutdown is now entering really almost a month closed, and we are seeing real impact. Newark International Airport had to have a ground stop because TSA agents are calling in sick. They're not showing up. What is your reaction to what's happening with this government shutdown, and when would you expect some kind of an agreement here to reopen government?
Well, Maria, as you said, the contrast could not be more marked. That President Trump comes out to Asia, and I think at the end of the day, just this trip alone may end up in $2 trillion of investment. Then we go home, and the Democrats have decided, because of their poll numbers, because I don't even know why, they've decided to keep the government shut. If you look, the vote is 52 Republicans have voted to reopen. 3 Democratic senators have done the brave thing, come across the line, and we're coming home. And it's a global embarrassment that these Democrats are doing, and I think part of it is the mainstream media is not holding them accountable. If the Republicans were doing this, anytime the Republicans have refused to reopen the government, the amount of the terrible press that they get from the mainstream media is borders on hysterical, and where's the fairness here? And you're right, Maria, we are starting to eat into the economy, and imagine this: the day after Thanksgiving is the single biggest travel day in America. Biggest travel day in America, and as you said, airports are starting to close, and when families are not able to get together, they are going to blame the Democrats for this, and I hope that they will hold them accountable, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, I mean, look, we're already getting estimates of the cost to the economy, and that is exactly why I've been saying that this is becoming very dangerous, because when you see TSA agents calling in sick and air traffic control working without pay, you start questioning whether or not flying is safe. And that could lead to not just a government shutdown, but an economic shutdown. Based on where we are today, Secretary, what would be your best estimate in terms of the impact to the economy and economic growth right now?
Well, Maria, it's very difficult to predict, but we know that it's going to be lower. And my theory of the case here is, since President Trump came into office, as you know, the Democrats have been trying to stop him. They run to the circuit courts, and then the circuit courts get overruled by the Supreme Courts. They go to the media, and that the media is not able to stop him. So what have they done to try to stop this great economic momentum, bringing our country back from the 4 years of the Biden disaster? They're going to shut down the government, and it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. They're making things worse in an effort to stop the momentum that this administration has, and it's inconceivable to me.
And of course, Secretary, you are being attacked by Democrats for helping Argentina. Chuck Schumer said the other day something around the lines like, well, he can help Argentina, but he's not here reopening government. You pushed back at Senators Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar after their criticism of the administration's $20 billion currency swap with Argentina. You wrote in a tweet, their remarks are Peronist, referencing the former Argentinian president, Juan Perón. Tell us what you want to say to the Democrats who are trying to triangulate this Argentinian bailout and support for one of our important allies in the middle of this government shutdown.
Well, just because the Democrats doesn't come to work doesn't mean we don't come to work at Treasury. And I can tell you that we have been doing, we've been working full speed. The world can't go on hold because the Democrats have shut down the government. One of our great allies in South America, President Milei, needed a bridge to go into the election. And, it's inconceivable to me, that Senators Warren and now, unfortunately, Senator Klobuchar, who's normally much more level-headed, has gotten in on this, that 47 million Argentinians, we are helping them, and a majority of them now want free markets. Argentina suffers from a legacy of financial mismanagement. The poorest what was very interesting to me, the poorest segment of Argentinian society has switched over to President Milei. He has their support. Young people are voting for him, and they want a different kind of life. No money has been spent. It's from the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which I can use unilaterally. So I was able to do that. In contrast, we had been trying to help the farmers either through payouts or activating the Farm Credit Bureau to help farmers with next year's planting season. But we can't do that because these two senators have are part of the problem in closing the government. So I call on them to reopen the government. But, again, we've done an end run around them with these trade deals. And the soybean farmers are going to be fine. No thanks to these two. And, it's just inconceivable to me that, that they think that these attacks are going to hold any water, that the business of the U.S. government goes on with or without them. They're just proving how irrelevant they are.
Well, this is an incredibly risky bet that they're taking for sure. Real quick on the SCOTUS meeting happening November 5th. Secretary, what are you expecting? This is a very important hearing that the Supreme Court will be having on the president's use of the emergency as a justification for using tariffs. Are you expecting the SCOTUS to go your way? And if it doesn't, won't the U.S. have to pay back, what, $150, $200 billion in tariff revenue already collected?
Well, Maria, the revenue has been very helpful in terms of we had a lower deficit this year, not by much, from the big mess that we were left with the Biden administration. But just think about what's happened over the past months and the past weeks. If we are able to solve this fentanyl crisis, then it will have been because of the president invoking IEPA, which is an emergency authority. If the fentanyl crisis is not an emergency, I don't know what is. When the Chinese on October 8th threatened to put here, and think about this, when the Chinese on October 8th threatened to put on these global export controls on rare earth magnets that could have shut down our industrial base, the industrial base of the world, the president was able to exercise just the threat of 100% tariffs to negotiate with, and the idea that that negotiating leverage could be taken away from the President of the United States. Because I tell you, it would have been a mess if this rare earth regime had gone in, could have caused substantial single digits decline in GDP, massive job losses across the country. So I am sure that SCOTUS will take this into account as they are doing this. The president has used the powers judiciously and in an emergency situation to help the people and the economy of the United States of America, which is why they were designed.
Yeah, such a critical issue. Secretary, as we wrap up here, I want to get your take finally on the Federal Reserve Chairman position. You have narrowed down and disclosed the 5 candidates who you are considering as the next chairman of the Federal Reserve: Kevin Hassett, Chris Waller, Kevin Warsh, Rick Rieder, and Michelle Bowman. Can you give us any sense of when we will get that announcement?
Sure. We're going to be doing a second round of interviews, and I hope after Thanksgiving, sometime in early December, we'll be presenting a set of candidates to the president. It will be his decision, and I would imagine that we would have a candidate by Christmas. And I can tell you, Maria, that the decision by the Federal Reserve yesterday, the decision to cut rates by 25 basis points, I applaud, but the language that went with it tells me that, that this Fed is stuck in the past. Their inflation estimates have been terrible so far this year. They keep coming down. Inflation keeps coming down, and their models are broken. And I'm just not sure what they're thinking here in terms of signaling that they may not want to cut rates at the December meeting. They've got a lot to answer for, not only for this year, but for many years past, both in their GDP estimates and their inflation estimates, which are consistently wrong. And we're going to find a leader who is going to revamp the entire institution in terms of process and inner workings.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I mean, it's worth noting the fact that Jay Powell had to also add that extra, well, don't expect that this is going to be the beginning of some string of rate cuts. But, the problem is that the government's closed and we don't really have any data to actually assess the economy. So as my final question, Secretary, how would you assess the macro story right now, given the fact that we are watching a dearth of data and have no idea, in the face of some serious job cuts that have been announced, Amazon cutting jobs, UPS cutting jobs. These are corporate jobs. What can you say about the macro story in the face of all of that?
Maria, what I can say is I think I'm very optimistic for 2026, both in terms of growth and the inflation levels. I think we're going to go back to the same environment that we had under President Trump's 1.0, where we had high growth and low inflation. You look at the trillions of dollars coming into the U.S., I think that we're going to break ground on these factories. We are seeing a big increase in productivity, and I think the job growth will rebound very strongly. And more importantly, I think the real after-tax wages for working Americans are going to go up. As you may know, I'm also the IRS commissioner, and we can see that President Trump's campaign promises, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, that working Americans have not changed their withholdings. So we should be seeing substantial refunds in the first quarter of next year. Working Americans will change their withholding, and that will give them an immediate boost to their earnings in on January 1st of next year. Because what's really happened here is the low-end consumer has gotten killed, and President Trump is promises made, promises kept on his campaign promises, and it's going to start flowing through to working Americans next year. We're going to have, Wall Street's done great, and Main Street can do great also. So I think we're going to have parallel prosperity next year.
That's wonderful to hear. And Secretary, I want to thank you so much for all of your efforts. Obviously, it is making a huge difference for the American people. And as you always say, President Trump doing peace deals, tax deals, and trade deals, obviously resonating with the American people. And we thank you both, sir. Thanks for this substantive interview this morning, sir.
Good, Maria, and he's doing them all over the world. Good to see him.
And to you. Thank you. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent this evening in South Korea. We'll be right back. Stay with us.